Social Changes, Chapter 1. Social Structure. During the latter part of the 19th century, just a generation before our period of 1910 to 2010, the relationship between parents and their children was one of intolerance. The man of the household, after his wife's childbearing period, had numerous children, 15 not being uncommon. The break on even larger families was the early death of many babies and young children. The father was frequently held in awe. What he said was believed, and what he ordered obeyed. Wives addressed their husband not by using their Christian names, but by their title of Mr. The houses of the many were small, and the families large. The only way life could be made bearable was by discipline, this being the main difference between the decades during this 100-year period. Rigid rules and laws, social, religious, and household, were laid down for every facet of life. This was not to inhibit thought, which it did, but linked to behaviour, keeping one's place, this being a method of suppression. Social behaviour was channelled and funnelled down a narrow path which all social classes proudly maintained. Each social class, sect and division knew what to eat, wear, play, perform, and worship. It was possible to move within this structure both up and down, and within each layer, and this was generally brought about by a change affecting the family's income. As soon as this change occurred, the standard of living followed suit. An increase in income would be achieved by entrepreneurship, education, or inherited wealth. One of either of these projected the family upwards. Some of the causes why there was a fall of income, a split up of the family's estate, decline in the estate's value, poor marriage resulting in a divorce, reduction in stock market values, bad investments, government taxes, gambling, drinking, poor health, war, and loss of job. This directed the person downwards to a lower social level. Women's suffrage. At the end of the 19th century, opportunities became open for women working in cloth-making factories, as secretaries and as shop assistants. The liberalisation of education enlarged the teaching profession. It was a slow business gaining political and social emancipation. The first country to offer women the vote was New Zealand in 1893, and the last France, Italy and Japan in 1945. By 1903, women's suffrage became a force to be reckoned with. By direct action, demonstrations were arranged and campaigns held. The result, arrests were made and fines imposed. And gradually, by keeping the campaign alive in the news, the matter became a topic of conversation. In Britain, women had to leave the teaching profession and civil service when they became married, and this gave women the choice of career or raising a family. In 1912, nurse Margaret Sanger began raising the issue of many adverse health effects caused by too frequent childbirths, abortions, and miscarriages. After World War I, Marie Stopes, 1880 to 1958, published Married Love in 1918, and 3 years later, Wise Parenthood. The campaigns for women's rights and family planning was an enormous success, eventually gathering momentum till Lady Sears' draft Sex Anti-Discrimination Bill in 1973, which itself led to the 1975 British Sex Discrimination Act, equal pay for equal work. However, the First World War did more for the liberation of women than any other factor. It was their work during the war which made their contribution indispensable, which gained the support of the country. There was no change of the breach being plugged. Women became independent and liked it. No longer did they have to put up with dominance and derision. As their wages supported their husbands, so the increase became indispensable. Standards began to rise, expectations climbed, and horizons broadened. Large families became a thing of the past, and certain sectors of society became women's preserves. As the First World War got into its stride, automation and the conveyor belt system of mass production became the norm. Every part of the armed services needed more materials and fighting machines. New trucks, tanks, guns, merchant ships and aeroplanes were invented and built, and women were an essential part of their production. After the war, transportation, the movement of freight, became an indispensable part of an industrial society. The production lines that had turned out war materials were now converted into turning out the latest gadgets and household goods. There was more to buy, and more money circulated by the increased working population. To cope with the new machines, peacetime activities and the manufacture of consumer goods, further and higher education had to keep pace. Businesses had to engage new skills and handle new equipment. Colleges and polytechnics devised courses for the new burgeoning technology. New materials had to be discovered and invented to build the latest machines. And as mechanization developed, cheaper products became available. And as all aspects of society advanced, so did the cause of women's liberation. As men returned from the war, they naturally wanted their old jobs back. The unions assisted this by taking place, forcing women out of the factories and workshops. Heavy industry and factory workings now became the preserves of the men. Building and construction work employed no women. It was in white-collared office jobs that women ousted men. Personal assistants, stenographers, secretaries, shorthand typists, typists of all descriptions, Rono copyists, filing clerks, and office juniors gave women employment, even in hard times. Hospitals claimed another vast section of female workers, as did shops and department stores. It was these women's wages that boosted their husbands' earnings, and it was this additional money which gave families extra cash to invest in housing. Gradually, where at one time families rented these new-build houses, a different group of owner-occupiers took possession. New housing estates were developed. All these new homes needed furnishing and household goods. Women not at home had to deal with child-rearing and running the home. Shopping and cooking both required forward planning, tasks that were slotted in between cleaning the home, washing the clothes and ironing. Young children were taken to school and picked up. This started and finished every school day. Organising children's play, extracurricular experiences and out-of-school experiences had to be arranged and paid for. Having a property of one's own made household chores more bearable, giving a sense of positive feedback, doing something for oneself. But it never fully compensated for being paid, an action that demonstrated worthwhileness and being wanted. House building enjoyed a great boom at the turn of the century. Owner-occupation was a complete change from the expectations of previous generations. Building societies blossomed, extending the loan period to 20 years. The housing boom, just after the construction of the railway network in the late 1800s, was now extended. New garden suburbs linked towns together, filling in the spaces between the railway stations. Mass owner-occupations quickly changed the previous rented market. Smaller families allowed greater savings. The 10% deposit on house purchase was now achievable for the many. The numbers of insured men continued to rise. Women peaked at 3.5 million, a third of the figure for men. Women were a quarter of the workforce, and rising as more became trained. The employment of women in full and part-time work did not alter the preconceived role of women, having their place within the home, looking after the children. The numbers of men domesticated were few and far between. Men expected to be waited on, their meals ready on time. Once again it took another war, and the even greater necessity for women to go out to work, to administer and provide for all-out war. This finally gave them a chance to say, "I can choose my own lifestyle," something that they couldn't do beforehand. A husband and wife began to share household chores. It was still a long way off before they could both focus on their own careers. The 50s families turned their backs on the old social order. They wanted a freer, more libertarian world where women had the same opportunity as men with equal pay and conditions. Education. Increased expectations. Men who helped in the home stayed close to the home and were happy, maintaining the fabric of the home, and were considered domesticated. Those men who preferred to stay away from the home, to find work, take part in a hobby or sport, join associations and institutions, occupations that drew them away from the home, were considered undomesticated. Men who found joy in raising children, teaching home economics, attending those who were ill, remained close during the confinement and birth. They were considered civilly domesticated. Social domesticity. To be domesticated is more to do with a feeling rather than employment. It's also concerned with all those things which go on inside the house or dwelling, about the furnishings and contents, decoration and layout. In many respects, it's to do with man's evolution, aestheticism and level of taste. For a man to be domesticated removes him from those that hunt, go to war, or seek adventure. It can be said that society is becoming more domesticated as an evolutionary trend, becoming more civilized. The sexes sharing responsibility, helping raise the children in a safe environment whilst engaged in household activity. Age of childbearing. According to national statistics, there were obvious changes in the numbers of births from the 1950s to the 80s. This was attributed to the changes in the ages of mothers at childbirth. Women born in the 1940s had the lowest. They were those who contributed to the 60s baby boom. The graph shows that it was these women who had more children than those born in the 50s, climbing back to the 1920s level. The decline of family size averages in this century is due as much to many women not having children as to smaller sized families. Since 1963, there has been a decline in the number of children born, although since 2003 there has been a slight increase. What has happened is that there are more births to older women, aged 40 and over, and the average age of women giving birth is just over 29. Kinsey Report. The Kinsey Report, Dr. Alfred Kinsey, 1894 to 1956, Sexual Behaviour, revised in 1998, was treating the taboo subject with the correct statistical procedures. Dr. Spock, Dr. Benjamin Spock, 1903 to 1998, who wrote Children and Child Care, revised in 1992, wrote these two bestsellers, which have not been bettered on all aspects of marriage and children, and both these books are essential reading for all couples. Little has changed over the last few years to make his original thoughts irrelevant or out of date. All couples should be aware of the Kinsey report and its findings, particularly those of frequency of intercourse. They point the finger at normal average behaviour. It was not only a groundbreaking statistical report, but highly necessary to form a basis in understanding. The figures may shock, excite, or fill you with fear, but whatever feelings they do generate, they are statistically proven. The fertility rate for couples in 2008 was 1.97, a rise over the last 7 years from 1.63. The last time it registered 2 were in 1973. The average age for women having a first child remains at 29.3. And it can be expected that the fertility rate long-term suggests that it would continue to drop, including those of immigrant couples. The positive aspects of a written statement. It might be considered rather mechanical and unromantic to agree to a written statement of intent before marriage. A list of expectations and goals to question each other on understandings and considerations. This seems to me to be a satisfactory way of covering all aspects of life together, making sure there are no misconceptions and expectations, for we can all live in a romantic haze, but bills and children have to be considered. This list of topics covered makes sure that each person knows what the other wants and needs, and can highlight areas that need explanation and dissecting, which may reveal hidden hopes and fears. All answers show a train of thought, indicate an individual state of mind. It is then up to those who are involved to question themselves, to explore and expose differences, to find areas of agreement, to become more compatible, and to give a firmer footing for future decisions. The sooner these things are talked through, the easier it is. Being open and frank is not being silly, but sensible, and saves embarrassment later, when issues become almost too big to enter into discussion about. Being set in one's ways is, after all, to be avoided. It limits advancement and discovery. I do understand that some individuals, even if they are disappointed by their intended partner's answers, will continue with the marriage as an act of defiance. That doesn't predicate that the answered questions are not valid. It remains a joint effort made at a particular time and place in the relationship, for one or other changes their opinion, wishes to alter their answer. A revised agreement should be discussed and agreed upon. This ensures the altered position has been aired, and it's up to them, the couple, to find an agreed compromise. There are those who may believe they can alter their partner's opinions, hopes, and desires over a period of time by stealth, continually pressing the point or raising the issue. This may be achieved if the issue is relatively unimportant, but in the case of sexual matters and children, this should never be done, and only will cause resentment and unhappiness. This may all sound rather cold and clinical, taking little regard for continuity and momentary desire, but that's the point. On-the-spot decisions are rarely good or long-lasting. There is a positive side to talking things through and setting them down to form an agreement. I've set out here a case study to give a general overview of one particular couple's hopes and fears. Although it's general, it does give firm foundation for discussion and comment. Case study. Janet and John met at university. They were on the same course, reading sociology. After living in Hall for their first year, they set up camp together in a shared flat. Their relationship blossomed, spending their vacations together, including Christmases in each other's family's home. Both sets of parents viewed the situation as the new way, recognizing that their child was in a stable relationship which was proving beneficial. Each young adult knuckling down to work, supporting each other. Both graduates were expected to obtain a good pass mark and go on to find suitable employment. In their final year, they decided to get married, putting off the day until they each had found a secure job and obtained an acceptable employment contract. They explained all this to their parents. They were not alarmed, expecting this to happen, and happy that their child was treating the matter seriously. The parents were sufficiently interested to contact each other, introducing each other over the phone. They learned that the other's child had explained the matter, wishing to plan the big occasion with their parents' approval. Wanting their child to do as well as possible and not be diverted, both sets of parents said that they would help to make a down payment on a car if they succeeded in obtaining a good mark, knowing that being mobile helps when job hunting. The parents decided to speak to their child separately, to offer help where they could with the arrangements, and to set out some of the details all couples are faced with when contemplating marriage. Fortunately, the parents were happy with the child's choice of partners, and keen to ensure their child got off to a good start in married life. Both sets of parents owned their own home, through mortgage repayments, loan and interest. And knowing how hard it was financially when they first started keeping up the direct debit payments, they were sufficiently concerned to explain how important it was to provide as large a deposit as possible. The parents explained that running a car and saving for a deposit was going to be very difficult, and that there would be times when cutbacks might have to be made, putting some of their more elaborate plans on the back burner. The parents explained that some jobs are not as secure as others, making mortgage repayments difficult to guarantee. They painted a gruesome picture of the debt collector's or bailiff's man calling, removing furniture to the tune of the sum owed. They went on to say that having a good name at the bank by keeping up regular savings is important for future security. Seeking deferred payments required a good past record. In the future, when time needs to be taken off work to have a child or to get over some illness, having a sympathetic bank manager is a relief. The parents emphasized that they should become credit-worthy by keeping their bank accounts free from becoming overdrawn. They went on to explain that this is not always possible, to be a member of a health club, golf club, or have an overseas holiday, as well as to provide extras for a family. Eating out and giving parties might stretch the bank account too far. Their overdrawn accounts cause and making each other short-tempered children. After all, Janet and John hope to be dedicated parents and work hard. There must be some enjoyment after all, and life after all cannot be perfect all the time. Not all couples want to have children or a large family. the state of marriage is a commitment which is there to provide security for children. If you believe that private education is necessary for your child, the fees are a big drain on the family's account. Not all children are blessed with good health, and the possibility of having a child disfigured or disabled should be considered. Perhaps life insurance is a good thing, after all. Many consider children necessary for a good marriage, although having more than the average number may force you to move house to provide each with a bedroom. Both Janet and John are adamant that they would not allow their children to eat meals in front of the television, but to sit up properly at the dining room table, insisting too that mobile phones and recorders are switched off. They believe that children should have their tasks to do and help with the cleaning away and washing up. And before bed, each child is questioned about their day, making sure there's no unhappy incident spoiling a happy environment. They both consider it important to listen to their children and to show affection and praise whenever possible. Questionnaire. Having considered the previous, do you believe it is better to own your own home or to rent? Is it important for you to have children? Do you believe children make a marriage, or would it be a disappointment if you only had children of one sex? Is sexual satisfaction important to you? And how soon would you like to have children? Do you believe that it is right to spank your child if they perform badly, misbehave, or don't stop shouting? Would you allow swearing in your house? Is your partner's happiness more important than possessions? If you prefer house purchase rather than renting, should the property be in your name, your partner's, or jointly owned? And will you make that commitment in a will? Would you live in an old farmhouse or modern villa, built in the country or in a town? If you insist on natural food cultivation without chemicals, would you be prepared to grow your own? If children are sought, are you prepared to relocate to a larger home, close to a school or near a baby minder? Would you extend into the attic? Do you believe in selection for grammar schools, or are comprehensive schools good for all? Perhaps you believe secondary modern schools are only fitting for a certain group in society. If your child requires special medical treatment, needing its own room, would you be prepared to move? And would you rather furnish the home before starting a family? If you can only afford to furnish the kitchen and bedroom, how long would you wait to do the remainder before starting a family? And would you have your parents live with you rather than rely upon the state to provide a home? If the house needs redecoration, are you going to do it, or will you call in someone else? And how good are you at replacing a fuse? What style of furniture and decor would you prefer? Are your partner's tastes similar to your own? Would you say you and your partner are of the same social class? Do you and your partner enjoy similar music and film subjects, or have a hobby or sport preference? Which television programs do you enjoy most, and are they compatible with your partner's? It is said that having a belief leads to a more fulfilled life. Do you agree? Is it important to you to be married in church? And if you lose a game, does that make you keen to improve your skill, or do you tend to give up? The monarchy increases tourism. Are you happy to provide the taxes to maintain the status quo? Do you believe a pet gives the home a comfortable feel? And do you think of the world's sustainability when you fill your car with petrol or diesel? Or when you put out the rubbish, do you know about the Kinsey report, or have you read Dr. Spock on child care? Do you pay your bills promptly, or do you wait until the last moment? What do you think is more important? To keep to your word, or to give in to doubts? Talking the matter through. Now that's all over with, perhaps we can talk through your answers. I hope you agree it's been worthwhile, knowing some of your partner's hopes and fears and highlighting some of your own has been an important discovery. There are some who believe they know their own minds, are sure of their opinions and feelings. Some are not so sure. There are those who believe they know what they want, but cannot give voice to them. Perhaps they are shy or retiring, and there are others who can never make a decision because they can see so many conflicting issues, each problem a stumbling block to be overcome. How infinitely more difficult it is to ask people about sexual needs and how those needs are going to be satisfied, especially considering such matters as physical, emotional and social variations in a changing environment. It's a wonder that any marriage remains constant. It is all these variables that make having some sort of contract or statement outlining preferences, habits, hopes and goals.